So this week we're going to be exploring some of the practical aspects of scientific advising. And indeed, it is a very challenging but interesting time to be doing this with what's going on in our country with respect to challenges on environmental policy as well as within the state. So what we're going to cover is, first of all, refresh your perspective on earlier discussions about what role scientists play. We play multiple roles, and we'll be examining some of them as the context for which we're giving advice. Secondly, we're going to look a little bit more deeply at one of the ways, very practical ways, that we can hone our message in improving communication. We're going to touch briefly on the broader issues of scientific integrity, our responsibility to make sure that our science is well-founded and we're following the rules, if you will, also the rights of that practice. And, and then also we're going to be examining issues in the current climate, both in the nation and in the region, and some examples of the challenges that environmental scientists now are facing. And then finally, after you review this during the class period, we'll be doing some role playing, some exercises, some hypothetical examples, and we're putting you on the spot as the actors in these plays. So just rehashing what we covered earlier, we know that we discussed that scientists play many roles. Here is the Roger Pielke's honest broker image, and they can play roles as pure scientists, as issue advocates, as science arbiters, and of course this idea that Pielke had of helping decision makers walk through their choices as honest brokers. We also reviewed that scientists can have an influence through epistemic communities, groups of scientists who come together and agree to certain things and cross political boundaries and have effects that way, but also as members of advocacy coalitions, groups of folks, not only scientists, but people in the agencies, NGOs, and members of the public who basically share and communicate towards certain ends. But I think fundamentally we have to recognize that science is a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions. So to be effective as a scientist in any one of these roles, even though you might take a different approach and viewpoint, you really have to be respect and be consistent with that principle that it is a practice, that is an enterprise that we work together with, whether on over time, that builds and organizes knowledge, and that we have to have faith and emphasize things that are testable in terms of our explanations and predictions. So to communicate science most effectively, I want to introduce you to my friend, the message box. Here is the report, which is in the readings. This one's a new report. It's fairly short, easy to understand. It's a workbook, really, so you can take your own experiences, your own projects that you're working on, and going through this to kind of hone your message, if you will. It's really a deceptively simple tool, but it is incredibly versatile. It can be oriented to a wide range of issues, not only in science and not only on the environment, but in life, in many things in general. It can help you prepare for interviews with journalists. Do this before you pick up that phone and have that discussion with a journalist, or an interview with employers. It helps you plan presentations to be more effective, to getting to the bottom line. It helps you outline papers or talks that you're preparing, and also in preparing proposals, compelling proposals, and then finally, just to help you explain what you do to your family and friends. This concept of the message box is used broadly. I once was at a congressional hearing, and there was a representative of the offshore industry doing acoustic surveying, and he had his little message box there before him that he, or maybe with some help, had prepared so he can stay on message in answering the questions of the congressman. But it is taught and used with great effect by Nancy Barron, who has a journalistic background, and has been working for an organization called Compass for many years, in which he's writing about this, but also having many courses and teaching about this all over the country and all over the world, for that matter. Full disclosure, I'm actually on the board of directors of Compass, but I'm very keen on this message box approach. So what does the message box help us do? It helps us adapt our sort of staid and traditional organization of how we approach things as scientists to a way that people think about things that they need to factor in scientific information about. And it also helps us think about clear, simple language. So we all know that when we write a typical paper, we have this tradition, the scientific organization, the title, abstract. You have to give a background, methods, results, discussion, conclusion. So that it really is front-end loaded. If you read many papers, there's an enormous amount of time spent doing this upfront material, and often very little time spent doing the conclusions, which of course is what the rest of the world is interested about. So the message box is an alternative way to organize your thoughts and your messages, in which, as we'll see, we frame the issue based upon problems that it addressed. So what differences it make? What are the solutions that it leads us to? And what are the benefits of those solutions? And the important thing about is to keeping the language simple. Here are some interesting reflective quotes about the importance of simplicity of language. So this is the message box. What we need to do is first of all, frame the issue as we will describe it. And once you go through this, you do it on the first cut. And then when you go back and look at that issue from the eyes of the outside world, the person you're speaking to, and frame the problems and the so what questions, it actually helps you reframe and redescribe the issues more effectively. So you go to issues, what are the problems, how does it affect people in the environment, what are you seeing that you want to communicate, then addressing the so what question, why should anyone care, what is the importance of this, the solutions, well, okay, so you have an issue or a problem, how do you propose to deal with it? And then what are the benefits to the person you're giving the message to that you have answered these questions and frame the solutions? So you could go to this little workbook, work through it, read it. It's very simply written. And as we'll go down the rest of the semester and you're framing your own projects, I would urge you to kind of take this message box approach in making your presentations. So the so what question, for example, in this message box approach, it really depends on to whom you're speaking. You know, who's the one who wants to know so what? What does it mean to them? So you can see that the so what question may lead to different answers for policymakers, for managers, for an environmental or advocate group. Scientist is concerned about whether it's groundbreaking. It doesn't necessarily worry about whether it's going to support any kind of political agenda. It shouldn't anyway. The media has it news, and so on. So again, the message is context specific to the audience in which you're addressing the message. So very briefly, this is a perfect time to reflect on the issues many issues surrounding scientific integrity. And I'm giving you a very short reading from a summary of the EPA with respect to their environmental scientific integrity process. There's much out there. All the agencies now have, since 2010, required to develop their own scientific integrity processes around a general federal framework. And this is to ensure that the integrity results from the professional values that we share when conducting and applying results of science to ensure objectivity, clarity, reproducibility, and utility. So the very principles in which we're trained as scientists. This scientific integrity issue is important because it provides we scientists from a bias, our own biases of the particular group and organization we belong to, fabrication of data. Most institutions like universities like our own have rules related to scientific integrity, related to honesty and fabrication of data, plagiarism, and the like. It's also to guard against outside interference, political interference in the scientific process, censorship, and inadequate procedural and informational security is limited if we pay attention to scientific integrity. So this issue came up several years ago after, during the Bush administration, there was an attempt to kind of muzzle scientists, particularly climate scientists, some very distinguished scientists. And so as an outgrowth from that, it was intended to kind of set down the standards and approaches, but also to find some protection. So the guidance that the Obama administration put forth speaks to the fact that we want federal scientists to be able to speak out to the media and to the public about scientific and technological matters based upon their official work. Doesn't mean it protects them to speaking out generally about things in general or things that they haven't done, but their own work. But it requires that there be appropriate coordination with supervisors and public affairs office, the PR people. But in no circumstances may the public affairs officers ask or direct federal scientists to alter scientific findings. Now, at the same time, there's now, of course, with the changes in this country, emphasis on efforts to try to control that and to make sure that regulations and the like really have excessive amount of review and determination to kind of limit the power of science. This is, and so you'll be waiting to see once we have a science advisor, the president hasn't even named one yet, and begin to think about this administration's science policy. The degree to which the scientific integrity protocols and rules that were developed in the last administration, how they changed, it'll be interesting to see that. So we now are moving into a different climate in this country. And you've heard people mentioning, are we now moving into a post-truth world where truth, evidence really doesn't matter, and that we're, that we can shape that information to fit our political preferences in terms of outcomes. There's more emphasis on immediate economic interest that are driving particularly environmental policy, changes in environmental policy, right, as opposed to the long-term interest, the broader interest of society. That's manifest in the issues of denial of climate change, which you've seen and read so much about, I'm sure. That's going on in this debate in the country today. And what we see now is that we have, certain people think we have an assault on science. That's why folks have organized this March for Science in April. And there's definitely an assault on environmental protection by reversal of a variety of federal rules and regulations designed to protect the environment. There are deep budget cuts. So you see here, you probably seen and heard about budget cuts proposed for EPA and for NOAA, and there are other agencies to follow, including near elimination, 93% reduction of the Chesapeake Bay program funding, but also other regional environmental programs and extensive cuts to research and R&D as well. So the challenge that we'll be able to discuss this week, and then also in subsequent discussions, in this new world, how can scientists advise environmental management under these changing conditions, where we need to be able to speak truth and be brave, but also need to recognize that we don't want to get disinvited so that we aren't part of the process to influence public policy. So we're going to review, and we've already talked about some of these current controversies as examples of this. You may be familiar that it took very little time for the administration and the new head of EPA to withdraw the stream protection rule. This is the rule that was designed to keep putting waste and material removed from strip mines into streams from coal mining areas. And then there is also this issue of reversal of the previous administration's position on waters of the U.S. What defines waterways that we can apply the Clean Water Act to? Does it also include things like irregularly flooded streams, wetlands that that are removed from navigable rivers, these sorts of things. And we've also seen, if you have to be deaf, dumb, and blind, if you haven't, statements and policy reversals on climate change. So I just submitted this Friday an op-ed, we'll see if it's published, in which I've taken a response to what the administrator of new administrator of EPA said about humans' effects on climate change. And I want you to read this because it basically hopefully you'll try to understand what role I'm playing, which I'm not basically providing any kind of an advocacy-based position, but challenging the statement on the basis of its scientific merits and in the evidence. And we've also, I think I've mentioned this before, there are proposals to declassify Maryland's oyster sanctuaries through a very revised, now waterman-dominated Oyster Advisory Commission. And you can see some of the changes that are being discussed here. And I offer just as an example of how I've tried to approach this anyway from a scientific standpoint of a letter to the co-chairs of the commission and the Secretary of Natural Resources, raising some scientific questions, not taking a position, but raising some scientific questions which should inform not only my position as a commissioner, but other commissioners. And then we've discussed before this issue of termination of scientific staff in the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. And in fact, there is going to be a joint and Senate House hearing on Monday, March the 13th, at 2:30. And I think if you go to the Maryland General Assembly website, there's a little section that has live hearings, and you can probably click onto that. And if you miss it, you can actually go back, and these recordings are archived. Be interesting to watch that discussion. In addition, this year in the Maryland General Assembly, there's legislation to provide a ban on fracking, or if that fails, a moratorium. And there are questions, for example, for scientists who have worked on this. Some of our colleagues at the Appalachian Lab have been helpful to try to define best practices about fracking if we're going to go ahead with fracking. So there's an interesting question: is what is the limit of what those scientists should and say do? Because these positions about for or against fracking are usually based on many broader issues related to concerns about fossil fuel dependence, concerns about economic development, property rights, and that are outside of the purview of our scientists. But what is the appropriate role of our scientific advice giving under these circumstances? And then also there's one here with respect to way in the upper end of the bay at the mouth of the Susquehanna, the sediments that are built up in the dam. The current administration, Governor Hogan's administration, made various commitments and is very interested in dredging the sediments from behind the dam as a way to alleviate the problem of the dam filling and therefore its transfer of more sediments and nutrients as the dam is filled. So they really are anxious and interested in going ahead and dredging. So as an advisor, what is my role? What I've been doing is basically just raising questions, making sure they think through what are the implications, what are the criteria, what are the benefits, costs, these sorts of things as they move through it. So it's that time, just in closing, it's that time. You know what I mean? Every year there is an international competition called Dance Your Dissertation. And if you haven't seen any of these, you should. So I would for your entertainment and perception, understanding of how the role we have to communicate in this world, our science in this world, I would urge you to go to this particular video. All of these are on YouTube. That this was the international winner for the year 2015, and I chose it, but first because it has to do with an issue that we're discussing. What is the role in science within a diverse society in framing environmental regulation? You'll see that portrayed in this woman, Florence Metz, I think her name is, dissertation. Also, I chose it to give you an example, an inspiration, because I just think she's a great dancer and also has a great personality in her delivery of this. But you'll enjoy this. Please take a little time and go and watch this YouTube video of her dancing her dissertation.